I'd like to call to order the May 11th meeting of the James City County Chesapeake Bay Board. We don't have a Wetlands Board meeting tonight. The responsibility of this board is to carry out locally the Commonwealth policy to protect against and minimize pollution and deposition of sediments in wetlands, streams, and lakes in James City County, which are tributaries of the Chesapeake Bay. Mr. Wilson, can we have a roll call?
Certainly.
Here.
Mr. Roadley?
Here.
Mr. Waltrip?
Here.
Mr. Gussman?
Here.
Mr. Lukens?
Here.
Mr. Dunn?
Here.
First order of business are the minutes from the April 13th meeting. Are there any additions, deletions, changes to the minutes? Okay, the minutes stand approved. Our next order of business are public hearings. The outline for tonight's public hearings will be a staff presentation, followed by any questions or clarifications from the board. Then the public hearing will be opened. At that time, anybody wishing to speak may do so once called upon by the chair. All public speakers must state their name and address for the record. After everyone wishing to speak have done so, the public hearing will be closed and discussion among the board will start. Our first case is CBPA 22-0036 for 187 Waterton.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Robin Benedict, Watershed Planner for James City County, presenting CBPA 22-0036. Ms. Autumn Hauser of Williams Landscape and Design has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Mr. Walter and Ms. Virginia Doran for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the extension of an existing porch located at 187 Waterton. Sorry, the mouse is not working. This parcel is located within the Ford's Colony subdivision in the Powhatan Creek watershed. It can be seen here on the vicinity map outlined in blue. The parcel was platted in 1997 prior to the changes in the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 2004. The total lot size of this property is 0.68 acres and can be seen here on the aerial photograph. There's a sanitary sewer line at the back of the lot. The topography as it affects this site, and the resource protection area, of which 75% of the property is located within the RPA. You can see it outlined in green. The applicants are proposing to extend the existing patio located at the rear of the house to construct an outdoor kitchen. Here is the proposed porch expansion with the 50-foot resource protection area and the existing porch, as well as the property line up against the water and the building setback line. The total impacts to the RPA associated with this proposal equate to 267 square feet in the seaward 50-foot RPA. Required mitigation for this amount of impervious impacts equals 1 canopy tree and 3 shrubs. Here is the proposed mitigation plan outlined in green, with the yellow being the proposed extension. Here is site photography, the area where the extension will be located behind the house. As you can see, it'll come off of the existing porch. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the extension of the existing porch. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the construction of a porch is considered accessory in nature and the impacts encroach into the seaward 50-foot RPA. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief and if the exception request will not result in the degradation of water quality. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined the impacts associated with the proposal to be minor for the proposed development. Staff recommends approval for this exception request, and if the board wishes to approve the request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project, including a building permit if necessary. The submittal of a mitigation plan equating to 1 canopy tree and 3 shrubs be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division. A surety of $250 be submitted in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee the mitigation plantings. This exception request approval shall become null and void if construction is not begun by May 11th, 2023, with written requests for an extension to an exception submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than March 30th, 2023, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at this time.
Any questions for staff? Nope. Pretty
you.
straightforward. At this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. Would the applicant like to come forward and address the board? Come forward, state your name and address.
Walter F. Dorn, 187 Waterton, Williamsburg, Virginia. Okay.
Would have any questions for Mr. Dorn?
The only question I have, one of the focal points of the board is reducing runoff through the RPA.
Sir.
Is there any accommodation for treating the additional runoff from the proposed structure?
I don't believe so. I don't think we have one. There's, where the porch is, there's no extension of the porch towards the water. It'll just be 15 feet parallel along the side of along the back of the house.
Right.
Okay.
I get that. It's the increase in impervious surface that creates the sheet flow. So
I had expected Williams to be here today, Aaron Williams, so I think you'd have to ask him
Gotcha.
what they've got.
Any other questions for Mr. Dorn? Thank you.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak on this issue? At this time, I'll close the public hearing. Any discussion from the board?
Mr. Chairman, fairly minor encroachment.
Would someone like to make a motion?
Move to adopt a resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board case number CBPA 220036, 187 Waterton.
We have a roll call.
Yes, we have a motion to adopt. Mr. Roadley,
Yes?
Mr. Waltrip,
Yes.
Mr. Lukens,
Yes.
Mr. Dunn,
Yes.
Mr. Gussman.
Yes, okay, motion carries. The exception is granted. Thank you for coming out. Next case is CBPA 220038, 1588 Harbor Road.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Robin Benedict, Watershed Planner for James City County. This is CBPA 22-0038. Mr. Richard and Ms. Gail Flynn have applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the installation of artificial turf located at 1588 Harbor Road within the Governor's Land subdivision and the Gordon Creek watershed. It can be seen here on the vicinity map outlined in blue. The parcel was platted in 1994 after the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. The RPA, originally expanding 50 feet from the water, was expanded in 2004 to the current 100-foot buffer in 2004 after the ordinance revisions. The total lot size of this property is 0.3 acres, which can be seen here on the aerial photography. Here is the existing topography. The resource protection area goes up to about the front of the house, and conservation easement up to the back of the house. In October of 2021, officials from the James City County Stormwater and Resource Protection Division received notice that artificial turf had been installed on this property without the submission of a Chesapeake Bay Preservation Exception request. The applicants purchased this home in 2020 and the artificial turf had been installed by the previous owner. Total impacts to the RPA associated with this proposal equate to 400 square feet of impacts to the seaward 50-foot RPA. This project will also encroach on conservation easement located behind the house. Here's the 100-foot resource protection area, again at the front of the house. The 50-foot resource protection area and conservation easement located at the back of the house. and the 2 areas of artificial turf to the back of the house. Required mitigation for this amount of impervious impacts equals 1 planting unit, or 1 canopy tree, 2 understory trees, and 3 shrubs. Here's site photography of the existing artificial turf. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the installation of artificial turf. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the installation of artificial turf is considered accessory in nature and the filter media constructed underneath the turf is a compacted gravel. This exception request is being heard by the board after the initial construction of the project. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief and if the exception request will not result in the degradation of water quality. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined the impacts associated with the proposal to be minor for the proposed development. Staff recommends approval for this exception request, and if the board wishes to approve the request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. The submittal of a mitigation plan equating to 1 canopy tree, 2 understory trees, and 3 shrubs be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division. A surety of $500 be submitted in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee the mitigation plantings. This exception request approval shall become null and void if construction is not begun by May 11th, 2023, with written requests for an extension to the exception submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than March 30th, 2023, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at this time.
Isn't there a swale that collects the water and directs it away from the river? Or does it just run straight out?
Mr. Gusman, I'll be happy to answer that question. There is a berm that's 35 feet off of the face of the bulkhead that surrounds the marina to collect the impervious cover from the house and the immediate area behind the house where this project would be located and direct it into a system and take it across the street into a BMP. From that berm down to the marina, that area is vegetated with minimal impervious cover and it just access down to the docks.
And this is the second turf project in there, right? We approved one, what was it, a couple months ago? Okay. Other questions for staff?
Doesn't look like there's a lot of room for plantings. Has a specific plan been put forward for planting of the mitigation units?
Mr. Lukens, while there's been no plan submitted right now, if you look beyond the white picket fence area, that's the area that Mr. Wilson was saying we have very, very minimal, or will allow very minimal encroachments into. So generally in this section of governor's land, when people come to the Chesapeake Bay Board, that's where they are directed to put most of their plantings.
Other questions for staff? This time I'll open the public hearing. Would the applicant like to come forward and address the board? Does anybody have any questions for the applicant? Okay. Thanks for coming out. Would anyone else like to speak on this issue? This time I'll close the public hearing. Any discussion from the board?
I think the people who own property out at that location there has probably gone through enough for the last year with the renovation of the marina and the bulkheads and stuff that I can't see that they've been inconvenienced a whole lot out there, that's gonna, and we've already passed one before, that it's any problem with what I see here with what's going along with this.
Well, we established the precedent, I guess.
Mr. Chairman, I always object to the encroachments on the conservation easement, especially inside the RPA, especially with you know, turf. I can't support that.
Sort of a technical question for the members or staff. The fundamental problem with artificial turf is the substrate underneath it in terms of being less pervious than a natural topsoil would be.
Essentially, that's correct. The way that artificial turf's installed, to the best of our understanding, is that there's generally a gravel underlayer that is placed below the actual plastic turfing. And by county and state specs, DEQ or gravel is considered an impervious surface due to its compaction rate. So we treat it very similarly to, per se, a patio. While there is some possibility for infiltration and permeability, after it's compacted to a certain sense, it starts to act much like a concrete surface.
Oh, well, you got it. No, that's okay. We closed the public hearing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Didn't I close the public hearing?
You did, but you can reopen it if you'd like and allow him to speak.
No, that's okay. All right, I'm going to reopen the public hearing. Go ahead.
I'm so sorry. As far as, I actually install artificial turf, and there's two types of soil ground material you can use. You can use the crush and run, or you can use a more larger stone, number 68 or larger, or 57, that is a little bit more porous, like you would use for permeable patios and stuff like that, that you can use. And I've never seen a product of turf that didn't have a lot of holes in it for drainage. I don't know if that has any help.
That is.
Sir,
useful
before you
information.
step down,
Yes.
I need your name and company name for the
Adam
record,
Burris,
please.
Home and Turf Landscapes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
Sorry.
so
good to know. Thank you.
that's a good point. So there will be some drainage through
Yes,
it.
there is some drainage, and I don't know how I don't know how they installed it, but there's two methods of it, and most people use the more porous method because it's actually cheaper than using the more dense method. And it's supposed to be at least 6 inches of base underneath of it.
Okay.
Sorry.
You want to address the board? Okay, come on up.
And just to clarify, the artificial turf was not installed by the previous homeowner. I think it was maybe 2 or 3 homeowners before us. And in terms of being impervious, lots of weeds come up through that. I mean, it's not. I mean, we have to weed all the time, so it's not impervious by any stretch. So I'm out there weeding all the time, around and through, all the time. So
How about when it rains real hard? You see any sheet flow coming off of it and going over the berm and out?
not really, because you can see there's a little, there's a little border there, so it doesn't really puddle or anything, So, I guess that there's that gravel that, soaks up the water.
Okay, thank
But
you.
they had told us that we'll plant, and we don't have a plan because we didn't know what we had to do, but we'll do whatever we have to do, So
Okay.
we would hate to, the main problem is that it's such a small area, that it would be very hard to mow if we had, I don't know what we would do if we had to put, real turf there because of that fence. So that's the main problem. We didn't put it there, and it was just there, so we would have to figure out what to do, so.
Hey, thank you. Anybody else want to speak on this? You all sure? Okay, I'm closing the public hearing. Any discussion? Well, we heard everyone's comments. I feel sort of weird approving, voting for artificial turf, but I don't know. In the end, I have to ask myself, if I was out there measuring the runoff, I don't think you would see any difference, you know, especially since most of it's getting captured anyway. I don't think it's going to have any impact on water quality, this small area, and I'm going to go ahead and vote for it. Any other comments from the board? Can we have a motion?
Make it, I'd like to make a motion to adopt resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA 22-0038, 1588 Harbor Road.
Mr. Wilson, can we have a roll call?
We have a motion to adopt. Mr. Roadley,
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip,
Yes.
Mr. Lukens,
Yes.
Mr. Dunn,
No.
Mr. Gussman.
Yes, motion carries. Thank you for coming out. Next case is CBPA 22-0042, 5516 Mallard Run.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Trevor Long, James City County Watershed Planner, here to present CBPA-22-0042. Mr. Lance Bouchel has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a patio located at 5516 South Mallard Run within the Mallard Hill subdivision in the Powhatan Creek watershed. Parcel was platted in 1991 after the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. The property is outlined above on your screens here in blue. Again, that is within the Mallard Hill subdivision and the Powhatan Creek watershed, which is outlined here in yellow. Some aerial photography of the site itself. There is a sanitary sewer running adjacent and onto the southern border of the property. The topography as it affects this property, and the resource protection area outlined here in green. Total lot size of this property is 0.52 acres, of which 27% is located within the RPA. The applicant is proposing to build a patio to the rear of the existing home, of which total impacts to the RPA associated with this proposal equate to 300 square feet in the landward 50-foot RPA. Required mitigation for this amount of impervious impacts equals 1 canopy tree and 3 shrubs. On the board, you'll see a couple different colors. The area in yellow being the proposed patio of which encroaches into the RPA. And in red here being the 100-foot resource protection area as it sits on this property. The areas here in green are the proposed patio area that are outside of the resource protection area. So all part of one project. However, the distinction between the green and the yellow is that the yellow portion does encroach into the RPA. And the orange is are areas that are currently existing. So we do have an existing upper level deck and retaining wall set here on property. Some site photographs. Flagged in orange is the area of encroachment into the RPA. As you can see, it's the circular area that was denuded on the plan previously. Again, here's the edge of the house and looking back towards the resource at the moment. This is the existing timber retaining wall that I was discussing earlier. And standing from the side of the house looking at the patio as well. Standing back towards the resource, you can see the upper level deck that is there. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the construction of a patio. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the patio is considered accessory in nature. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicant any special privileges denied by Chapter 23, Chesapeake Bay Preservation of the James City County Code, to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 of the James City County Code and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming that are related to adjacent parcels, and that reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff has reviewed this application and exception request and has determined the impacts associated with the proposal to be minor for the proposed development. Staff recommends approval for this exception request, and if the board wishes to approve the request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into its approval. The application must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. The submittal of a mitigation plan equating to 1 canopy tree and 3 shrubs be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division. A surety of $500 be submitted a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee these mitigation plantings. And this exception request approval shall become null and void if construction is not begun by May 11th, 2023, with written requests for an extension to this exception be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than March 30th, 2023, just 6 weeks prior to the expiration date of this exception request. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions for staff?
Yeah, I have a question. Are the retaining walls, are they planning on improving those as part of this project?
Not to my knowledge. I believe those are proposed to remain.
And then it looked like there was the slope on the inside the RPA. Did they plan on backfilling that at all or leveling it?
I do not believe so.
Mr. Long, how would you describe the site conditions with respect to sheet erosion?
As you can see in some of these photos, they do have some difficulty growing grass here, which could or may be leading to some erosion on the property. It's hard to say whether or not that's due to shading in the area, because just adjacent to those retaining walls is a very full canopied resource protection area.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, at this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. Would the applicant like to come forward and address the board? Yeah, okay, come on forward. We may have some questions.
I'm Lance Buchel. I'm the homeowner.
Any questions for Mr. Buchel?
Yes, sir. So as I've discussed previously, and as the chairman stated at the beginning of the meeting, part of the function of the board is to help reduce nutrient and sediment flow into the waterway. And so when we see active erosion and a proposed improvement, the question is, does the improvement help address the erosion that you're experiencing? And if so, how are you treating that stormwater runoff?
Okay, so when they built the house, it was on a slope, clearly. So they had to dig into the slope. So most of our backyard is clay. And with all the shade there, I can't grow any grass really. That's weeds, and in the summertime, I don't water. You get a lot of erosion. You see a lot of water running out there. So we'd like to hardscape, and I think that will actually help with the erosion problem. And the retaining wall in the back there, it's not timber. It is I don't know, concrete, or not concrete, but pavers or whatever those things are.
So the question then, I understand that the improvements may help reduce the rill or the sheet flow erosion that you're experiencing where the patio goes, but then you also have that quantity of water that's running off and has potential erosive force itself. So have you given any thought to how that might be treated? Some type of infiltration. I know you said you've got clay, not great for infiltration, so.
No, currently currently the runoff where our leaders come down, we have pipes and they go underneath the retaining wall. So we plan to still have pipes going underneath the hardscape and going around the retaining wall. But no, I mean, we do plan to put a lot of planting in the area. As you can see up there, there will be a lot of planting, new planting that we
So
put there.
in looking at this, then it's my understanding that the water runs from the right-hand side of the image to the left-hand side towards
Correct.
the bulkhead
Correct.
or retaining wall.
Yeah, and right now when we get rain, yes, you can see a lot of the water running over the retaining wall. So our hope is that with the planting that we have there behind the retaining wall, that'll capture a lot of it.
I would encourage you to perhaps discuss this more with staff once the board is done with it, to anticipate how you might capture and treat. I'm just concerned that you may end up exacerbating the problem, because untreated, that what you're creating out there is more impervious than what's there, and so you're just going to get more water moving off the property. So just, I would give it some thought as in perspective to the plantings.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk with Robin more about if there's anything else we can do.
Understood. Thank you.
All right.
Members of the board, I did want to add one thing as it relates to the runoff on this. I failed to mention that they are proposing a river rock swale that will likely take some of the runoff coming from the patio outside of the RPA area and direct it past that retaining wall.
Trevor, where would that be located on this diagram?
Or that would be located just above the yellow patio area here, this gray object here.
Would anyone else like to speak on this issue?
I'd like to add, there's currently one downspout that we have in the back that there's no pipe that goes underneath. And that adds a lot of water when it rains really heavily. But we're going to actually add another pipe underneath that to run that water out so it doesn't run off.
So where's the pipe going to drain to?
It's going to go underneath the ground and underneath what he was talking about up there. So the second retaining wall that we have, where that gravel we're going to put to catch some other runoff, the pipe's going to run underneath there.
It's going to go underneath the swale?
I don't know what the swale is.
The swale would be this. You have a call out here on this
Yes.
plan.
Correct.
So if the pipe is exiting there, isn't it just going to cause erosion downstream of that where the pipe exits?
That the pipe issue is something we weren't aware of. I'd be happy to talk with you further about that as well, and potential issues that could.
No, absolutely. We'd be happy to listen to you and to take your advice if there's other erosion measures, because you're right, once we put the water out there, there's more potential. So if we have.
I'm just saying, if you're carrying a pipe that has a lot of water and it's, going underneath the rock, it's going to eat away the slope wherever it exits.
I see that.
Okay, so Trevor, if we approve this, will you deal with this issue?
Yes, sir.
This can be
I think
considered.
what you're saying is like a diffuser type setup, so when it comes out there, it's coming out in a force because you're containing it through that pipe, and you want to diffuse it out over an area like this instead of like this, because it's going to cut it.
Yeah, and we'd be happy to, because it's not in my interest to have erosion there, because then it will start affecting that retaining wall.
Okay. All right, so just, if it's approved, make sure you address that issue with the staff.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. This time I'll close the public hearing. Discussion from the board.
Mr. Chairman, I think our discussions with the applicant were fruitful, and I think they understand the concerns of the board, working with staff to help reduce erosion. So I'm in favor of the project, provided that consultation occurs.
Any other comments? Would someone like to make a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA 22-0042 at 5516 Mallard Run.
We have a roll call.
Motion is to adopt. Mr. Roadley?
Yes?
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Lukens?
No.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Gusman?
Yes. Motion carries. Thank you for coming out, and, be sure and, talk with the staff on these issues. Next case is CBPA 22-0050 for 2405 Sarah Spence.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Trevor Long here to present CBPA-22-0050. Mr. Chase Grogg of Landtech Resources, Inc. has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Ms. Lisa Goodman for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the installation of a pool and patio located at 2405 Sarah Spence Court within the Vineyards at Jockey's Neck subdivision and the College Creek watershed. Parcel was platted in 1990 after the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. The total lot size of this property is 0.78 acres, of which 51% is located within the RPA. Above you can see the parcel outlined here in blue, and the watershed again delineated here in yellow. An aerial view of this property that we're talking about, and the resource extending here behind this property. Sanitary sewer and the topography slopes back down towards the resource here in the vineyards. And the resource protection area, again encompassing approximately 51% of this property, outlined here in green. The applicant is proposing to install a pool and patio to the rear of the existing home. The applicant came before the board on February 14th, 2018, and received approval for the construction of a pool, patio, driveway extension, and detached garage. The applicant is now proposing an approximate 923 square foot pool and surrounding patio in a different location than the approved 112 square foot pool initially. Above, you'll see the previously approved site plan, again, with the detached garage, driveway extension, lap pool, and a relocated path to accommodate for the bioretention. Again, in the next slide, you will see the new site plan. This is the originally approved pool from February 2018.
Trevor, but
Yes, sir.
it was not built, or was built.
The majority of this project was built, and I will show you the rest of that. But however, this pool was never constructed, that is correct. Portions of the plan you'll still see here. This is the constructed garage. This was put in, and this patio area here is already existing. I'm sorry, the colors are a little difficult to see. However, the light yellow here is new proposed impervious area, where the darker shaded yellow or orange are places that are either were never constructed, or the new proposed areas are going on top of existing impervious. The existing patio is 132 square feet, of which the pool will cover. This is this section here. And approximately 80 square feet of the driveway that were never approved, in addition to the original pool area. Therefore, given these numbers, total new impacts to the RPA associated with this proposal equate to 599 square feet of impacts to the landward 50-foot RPA. This is, if anybody was interested, the breakdown for the bioretention area. I believe the contractor is here. However, the new proposed area will be captured in the currently installed bioretention that is on the property. And this is a breakdown of the impervious that was originally constructed versus new impervious. So again, we have a 132 square foot patio that was existing, a 112 square foot pool that was never put in place, however was approved by the board, and 80 square feet of a driveway extension that was never constructed, equaling 324 square feet of either non-constructed or previously approved impervious area of which the pool will be going on top of. Out of the 923 square feet of new impervious, that gives us a total of 599 square feet coming before the board tonight. There is an existing bioretention filter that will treat the proposed impervious cover, as I was stating earlier. However, require mitigation for this amount of impervious impacts equates to 1 canopy tree, 2 understory trees, and 6 shrubs. The applicant has, or 3 shrubs, excuse me. The applicant has proposed to plant 1 planting unit, therefore satisfying county mitigation requirements for this amount of impervious impacts. Some site photographs. As you can see, the constructed garage above, along with the patio area of which this pool will be going on top of. These stakes here indicate the edges of the pool, denoted in pink. Beyond this white structure here is the bioretention area that I was talking about earlier as well. From the other side of the property, looking back towards the area where the pool will be constructed again, these pink stakes being the corners of the pool. Looking at some areas that were originally proposed to be impervious, however, were put in as planter gardens. And taking a step back and attempting to see all of this area that will be covered up and or extended into the RPA. This is the bioretention that will capture this runoff and treat it. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the installation of a pool and patio. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the construction of a pool and patio is considered accessory in nature. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicant any special privileges denied by Chapter 23, which is the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 of the James City County Code and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are either self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming that are related to adjacent parcels, and that reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined the impacts associated with the proposal and previous approvals to be major for the proposed development. Staff recommends approval of this exception request, and if the board wishes to approve the request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into its approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project, including a building permit, erosion and sediment control plan, and a land disturbance permit if necessary. The plantings of 1 canopy tree, 2 understory trees, and 3 shrubs. And that a surety of $500 be submitted in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee these mitigation plantings. And that this exception request approval shall become null and void if construction has not begun by May 11th, 2023, with written requests for an extension to this exception be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than March 30th, 2023, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date of this permit. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I have a few questions. The existing bioretention basin, that was required by the 2018 permit, right? That was one of the permit conditions.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Wait, but will the bioretention basin be expanded?
To my understanding, it will not be expanded. However, I will let the contractor correct me if I'm incorrect on this in any way.
Because there's, a lot more impact now, so the calculations, right, must show that the existing bioretention basin can handle all this additional flow.
That is correct, and my understanding from the contractor is that it was oversized and is intended to treat the new proposed area in addition.
And how was it that for the additional 600 square feet of impacts, this is only one, the calculations are only one planning unit is required?
It's approximately one. It is slightly over. The mitigation breakdown is on a 400 square foot basis. So given that there was also a bioretention here, staff required one planting unit. We would be amenable to increasing that if the board would like to see more mitigation.
Other questions for the staff?
Mr. Long, is the outfall for the BMP constructed currently?
Yes, sir.
Did you inspect that? Is it functioning properly? No scour?
There does not appear to be any scour. No.
Did you perhaps examine, I'm just curious, rain gardens are great, but they also require maintenance or they clog. No issues, no evidence there of clogging?
No, I did not see any evidence of clogging or anything that would indicate that the BMP itself is not functioning correctly. It appears that they do maintain with different plants in the actual BMP itself.
Thank you.
Long, you're confident, I guess, after the site visit, that the rain garden will actually end up collecting the runoff from this proposed, from the new construction in the area. There seemed to be a sort of an open swale down to the rain garden, and that looks to be sufficient.
Yes, and staff is taking the word of the contractor on the engineering practices and the quantity that the BMP will hold. So I will allow the contractor to explain more about the engineering side of that.
Will you actually get the calculations and review the calculations that the contractor provides?
We do have a chief civil engineer on staff. If memory serves correct, this did have an erosion sediment control plan. At that time, those calculations would have been reviewed by the county staff, not either of the watershed planners, but by a civil engineer.
Okay. Well, that's good. Any other questions for the staff? Okay, at this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. Would the applicant like to come forward and address the board?
Good evening, members of the board. Chase Grogg with Land Tech Resources, 7657 Turlington Road, Toano, Virginia. Yeah, I guess with the majority of your questions being around the BMP, the reason that is sized already correctly was when that was designed for the original project. The minimum square footage for that BMP was 150 square feet by the DEQ spec. And so our original impervious for the site was below that. and that's why just the small increase in impervious, if you go back to the calculations, Trevor, that BMP it's designed to handle over 5,000 square feet of impervious, which you can see up at the top there. And so when you do the math on it, which was part of our supplied plan, it shows that basically the square footage of that BMP only needs to increase the 3 feet. It was kind of a convenient, I never like over designing necessarily per se, it's more money to have it installed and everything. But since that's how it was done previously, it became handy for this project that they don't need to go in there, try and cut alongside of it. That you can see from the pictures, it's a very well established BMP. Ms. Goodman, the homeowner's here as well to take care of one of your comments. We're happy to take that to 2 mitigation credits as part of this so you have the BMP that's already designed to handle that extra little bit of impervious, and then we'll do 2 credits to kind of get across the border, to go to 800 technically. And then one other point, I believe that this lot was actually platted prior to the Bay Act, and it was like a few weeks just prior. So I think that's an error in staff's report that I did not notice before tonight. So just as a fact. Yeah.
Yes, that is, that appears to be correct, and we also had it listed as platted in 1990, but I wasn't sure exactly how far ahead that was.
So this got platted July 23rd, and the Bay Act is August 6th, so, right under the line.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, there were provisions in place at the time of the original Bay Act to grandfather subdivisions and lots that were under development in the plan review stages. So this was grandfathered under that provision as well.
Okay. That issue has come up several times before.
Happy to answer any questions you guys have.
So upon your inspection, the BMP appears to be working well?
Yeah, BMP, there's no erosion there. It's being maintained. That ball cypress in the middle of it is doing great. Fresh mulch, no signs of any erosion. And additional, I think if you were to actually go out there and count all of the mitigation that Ms. Goodman has done out there with her plantings that you can see from the picture, I think we're probably far above what was originally approved plus what will be done, if this is approved as part of this project.
Thank you.
Just for my own edification,
Yes, sir.
can you describe what's involved in the maintenance of a BMP, over the course of several years?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, the biggest concern with a BMP is that the media inside of it gets clogged. So, if all of a sudden this grass wasn't there and you had other sediment going in there, since this is a well-established backyard, as long as you're keeping the mulch there, the berm behind it in good condition, because it's meant to pond 6 inches and then go over top of that. So if you start seeing any signs of erosion or any issues like that, you want to take care of that to make sure, nothing happens. And kind of what you had asked about before with the outlet pipe, opening the cleanouts, making sure that there's no standing water so that it's operating and functioning. And that, another obvious sign would be if it was just ponding water, it would be that it's not infiltrating accurately or correctly.
In worst case, you might sort of clean it all out and put new material
Yes, worst case,
in
you're
and-
cleaning it all out, starting over.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Hey, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Would anyone else like to speak on this issue? Okay, at this time, I'll close the public hearing. Can we make a note that the applicant did volunteer to increase the planning units to 2 mitigation units? So make sure that that's reflected in the permit.
Yes, sir.
Any discussion from the board? Sure.
Something we didn't actually talk about why the project kind of changed, so I just wanted to bring some information. I know that wasn't a question, but just so you're aware, since this was done pre-COVID, the pool that was originally decided to go in there is no longer available, as well as the whole point of this project were for Miss Goodman's parents to be able to exercise. That's why that one was a lap pool. And so that pool was originally more of a plunge pool, and so access into it was going to be difficult without a set of stairs. So that's why you'll see with this plan that there's basically no patio around this pool whatsoever. It's so that you can come down the stairs to a small patio, there's stairs down into the pool, and you have the pool itself. So that's why there's not an 8-foot patio around the side of it or anything. It's basically a small patio in front of the steps into the pool, and then just kind of something to put around the edge of the water. So just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Okay, the public hearing is closed. Any discussion from the board?
I know, Mr. Chairman, I know this looks like a lot of encroachment into the RPA, at least with the prior permit and the current ask. I also recognize that the applicant has done exactly what we ask in terms of treating runoff, using infiltration, and so in general, I'm going to support the application.
I feel the same way. I mean, the system's working, it's over-designed. That's what we've been asking people to do, so I can't fault them for that. Any other discussion or comments? Can we have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA TAC 22 TAC 0050 at 2405 Sarah Spence.
We have a roll call.
Motion is to adopt. Mr. Roadley?
Yes?
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Lukens?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Gusman?
Yes, motion carries. Thank you for coming out. Next case is CBPA 22-00-0051, 141 Riverview Plantation Drive.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Trevor Long, Watershed Planner, here to present CBPA 22-0051. Oops, excuse me, that is the wrong staff. Here, nobody really wants to hear the previous staff report read twice. So, Mr. Edward Jordan has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the installation of a deck and access paths located at 141 Riverview Plantation Drive within the Riverview Plantation subdivision and the Skimino Creek watershed. Parcel was platted in 1962 prior to the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. Total lot size of this property is 1.65 acres, of which 59% is located within the RPA. Above, you will see the property outlined here in blue and the watershed divide here in yellow. The applicant is proposing to construct a 16-foot by 32-foot covered deck to the rear of the existing house. Here on the aerial, you can see the approximate location of this improvement and an overall view of the site plan as well. Some topography from the site. This property is unique in that there is a resource protection area and floodplain coming from a couple different directions. This is the York River here, adjacent to the parcel. You will see the resource protection area outlined here in green. This draw is a perennial draw, creating wetlands and subsequent resource protection area coming up the side of the property as well. Again, the applicant is proposing to construct a 16-foot by 32-foot covered deck to the rear of the house, which is here. A couple additions to this site plan. There is a lot going on here and a couple different colors. Some existing items that are out here on site already include an existing drain field and septic system in red, and an existing propane tank area here in blue that was taken into consideration in the development of this site plan and the location choice for this deck. So Here's 16 by 30 foot, 32 foot covered deck, the other areas in yellow are the access paths that have been approved or are being requested to be approved. One of these access paths has been approved administratively by staff, which is an administrative action that staff can take. However, because the applicant is requesting two, one from the rear of the house to the covered deck and one from the rear of the house to the pier, we wanted to bring this to the board's attention and also bring the impervious area associated with these two access paths under review for mitigation purposes. The access paths are proposed to be about 4 feet wide. Therefore, total impacts to the RPA associated with this proposal equate to 881 square feet of impacts to the landward 50-foot RPA and 237 square feet of impacts to the seaward 50-foot RPA, equating to a total of 1,118 square feet of impacts in total. Required mitigation for this amount of impervious impacts equal 4 canopy trees, 8 understory trees, and 12 shrubs, of which the applicant has verbally agreed to plant. Some site photographs, standing now near the edge of the pier, looking back upwards toward the property. The area flagged here in orange is the proposed deck. You will see some trees that were taken down. The applicant has communicated to me that those were trees that were damaged in a storm, and he cleaned up the remaining stumps by cutting them flush to the ground. Looking back towards this area, again, marked here in orange. Down in this section here is the draw that brings the resource protection area up onto the side of this property. And a little bit closer to the deck, giving a fairly good indication of its size. This is the existing septic drain field, I believe. The existing propane is on the other side of this stairwell here. Staff has evaluated the application and exception requests for the installation of a deck and access paths. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the construction of a deck is considered accessory in nature and staff will only approve one access path administratively. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicant any special privileges denied by Chapter 23. That the exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 of the James City County Code and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming that are related to adjacent parcels, and that reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined impacts associated with the proposal to be major for the proposed development. Staff does recommend approval for this exception request, and if the board wishes to approve the request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into its approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project, including a building permit if necessary. The submittal of a mitigation plan equaling 4 canopy trees, 8 understory trees, and 12 shrubs be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division. That a surety of $2,000 be submitted in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee these mitigation plantings. That all construction, including the deck, fence, and pathway, must be of flood-resistant material and anchored to withstand flood waters in the coastal AE/VE zones. That no adverse effects to any existing structures or adjacent properties will occur by this proposal. That all development activities located in the special flood hazard area shall comply with Article 6, Division 3, floodplain area regulations of the James City County zoning ordinance and receive all required approvals and permits prior to the commencement of such activities. This exception request shall become null and void if construction is not began by May 11th, 2023, with written request for an extension submitted to the James City County Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than March 30th, 2023, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date of this permit. Thank you, and be happy to answer any questions.
Can you go back to the diagram showing the layouts?
Yes,
Is
sir.
there was an awful lot of things on that
Yes, there are.
diagram. Can the deck be pulled in closer to the house?
We have discussed, I have discussed that with the applicant, and it was his choice to come before the board with the current site plan. So I will let him speak to its positioning and the reason as to why he would like it
Okay.
in its location.
I see where it shows the deck, and the RPA is making like a right-hand turn.
Yes.
Okay.
So
If it's pulled in closer, it's still entirely within the RPA, right?
yes, there is virtually no way to bring this deck outside of the RPA. I will go back to the overview here. So this yard, at least the side and rear, are entirely within the RPA.
Okay, go back to the diagram though. But if you pulled it, if you pulled it back to closer to the house, there would be more room between the deck and the water bodies, right?
Yes, sir, that's
And then
correct.
you could, you could, then there would be more, land available for, for the water to soak into. It'd still be in the RPA, but at least, it wouldn't be like, so close to the water. There would be more area between the deck and the water body for
That's
for
true.
percolation to occur.
Yes, sir, and I do know, and Mr. Jordan is here, I'm not aware of the specifics, though I do know I'm confident he is. I believe one of his reasons for this is a Virginia Department of Health standard between building structures in proximity to the drain fields. But I will let Mr. Jordan go into that in further detail.
You don't have a diagram showing where the drain field is?
The drain field, so the lower red rectangle is the septic system itself,
Okay.
and the more northerly rectangle is the drain field.
Okay. All right, well, okay, I'll leave that question out there. Why can't it be pulled back closer to the house? Is there a legal reason why that couldn't occur? Any other questions from the board members? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. At this time, I'll open the public hearing. Would the applicant like to come forward and address the board?
Jordan, thanks for having me. I wish that I could bring the deck up closer. The existing drain field, that diagram really doesn't show how far it extends. Right here, there's this rocks that, I just moved into this house last past August, but these rocks here, the drain field actually ends inside that. The septic tank is here. This drain field is 70 feet. And the VDA said it had to be 10 feet from the drain field. So hence, I measured out the drain field, and I actually went, I think, 14 to 15 feet from it, just in case we had problems with it. And that's the reason why I chose that location.
Let me make sure I understand this. So the drain field's actually larger than
The drain field is 70 feet long. This is the back of my home here. The septic tank is here, and 70 feet took it over into this area here. So I measured, I had the septic tank company come out, they marked the drain field, excuse me, and we measured 15 feet from it for gray area, and that's where we got that plot right there, and then we just kind of measured out from that.
Okay, so you've pulled it back it's as close to the house as you
Yes,
can
yes, sir.
you can get it. Okay. All right, well, that answers my question. Any other questions from the board for the applicant?
Any consideration for dealing with roof runoff?
We plan on having gutters and barrels to collect the water to where the plants around the house.
Any other questions?
Will, will it, deck will be on piles will be raised up?
I actually want to have it ground level. They said that this level, this location, I had it ground level, as long as they said it's under 2 feet, it won't flood there. I can't recall the exact specs, but I didn't have it off the ground. It wasn't elevated. They said long as the material could withstand then it's okay with being ground level.
Did you say you recently moved into the house?
August 22nd of last year.
So the tree clearing occurred by the previous owner?
The tree clearing there, if we could go back, there was a storm. Half the trees were dead. There were several of these behind it, and they kind of fell down on these trees, and they were just all leaning. I'm still finding new ways about this house. I just realized that the river floods, and my dock's underwater. But a lot of these older trees, the limbs are just dropping and falling. And I think that they had it cleared out because when we cleared this area out, I just, with the blower, blew all this out, and there's just oyster shells all there. So I don't know what they did or what their plans were, but one failed, then it fell into another, and it was a domino effect.
But keep in mind, you know, if you want to take down any trees in the RPA, contact the county ahead of time. You can't just go in and start clearing out trees in the RPA.
Sir.
Do you have any other plans for ground cover or something like that in this area?
Whatever we can do, either mulch. I have kids, and what's happening is there's nothing there, and I have dogs, and they're just bringing it in. My wife is killing me. She's like, hey, we gotta do something. So we'll kind of coordinate what we have. I like the rocks that's there, but I think they had mulch there. Whatever we can do.
Well, you've sat through a number of these hearings tonight, and you know what our focus is. So just keep that in mind as you propose things that help reduce or retard runoff, sheet flow, erosion. That's the charge of the board, and if anything you can do to support that, appreciated.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Would anyone else like to speak on this issue? At this time, I'll close the public hearing. I have a question for the staff. Did we approve I'm trying to remember. Did we approve shoreline protection for this site in the past? Was there a shoreline protection project for this site? Do you guys remember that?
Mr. Gussman, I don't recall us doing a wetlands permit for this particular property. There have been many in the neighborhood that have. But this particular property does not ring a bell to my memory.
There's no drop off at the edge of this. Yeah, a steep
Well, there is a
drop-off.
riprap revetment that exists out there. I just don't know when it was installed.
Any discussion in this case from the board?
All right, I had a quick question for the staff. Did the applicant state that he intended to use a contractor to do this work, or that he himself was doing it?
I believe he himself is doing the work. That'd be correct? Yes.
And Mr. Gussman, if I may, one more interruption. To answer Mr. Lucan's question about floodplain, the construction would have to comply if the exception is granted. There's a condition in there that has to comply with the floodplain ordinance. So the structure may or may not be elevated, but it will comply with the floodplain ordinance. I don't know if that answers your specific question, but
The
concept there was if it's elevated somewhat, you don't have much perhaps impervious surface. You've got something underneath. You won't have much viable vegetation, but
If it is elevated, the area under the deck would be open for some kind of infiltration, perhaps. That's correct.
There's a roof on this.
But correct, there's a roof over it and a sheet flow under it. It would not be vegetated, so we'd have to ensure at that point in time that erosion potential was reduced.
Okay. Would someone like to make a motion?
Move to adopt a resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA 22-00051, 141 Riverview Plantation Drive.
We have a roll call?
Motion is to adopt. Mr. Roadley?
Yes?
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Lukens?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes. Motion carries. You have your exception. Thank you for coming out. Our last case is CBPA 22-0021, 8072 Fairmont Drive.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Robin Benedict, Watershed Planner. This is CBPA 22-0021. Mr. Robbie Shackelford of Home and Turf Landscapes has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Mr. Paulo and Ms. Marcela Delgado for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the installation of an in-ground pool, patio, and 2 retaining walls on property located at 8072 Fairmont Drive within the Windsor Ridge subdivision in the Ware Creek watershed. It can be seen on the map above, outlined in blue. The parcel was platted in 2014 after the changes in the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 2004. Here's aerial photography of the site. Topography as it affects this property. The resource protection area, it is a little bit difficult to see in this color, but it scoops across the front of the house and takes up the entire backyard. The total lot size of this property is 0.43 acres, of which 58% is located within the RPA. The applicants are proposing to install an in-ground pool with a permeable paver patio and 2 retaining walls to the rear of the existing house. In April of 2022, this exception request came before the Chesapeake Bay Board and was deferred to amend the site plan. Above, you'll see the previous site plan, which included 223 square feet of impacts to the landward 50-foot RPA and 600 square feet of impacts to the seaward 50-foot RPA, equating to 838 square feet of impacts. So here again is the previous site plan brought before the board last month, showing the 50-foot resource protection area in red and the proposed pool and patio, as well as the 2 proposed retaining walls. Since then, staff has worked with the applicant to decrease the footprint of the proposal and incorporate stormwater management. So again, the 50-foot resource protection area, the proposed pool and patio, which the size has been decreased, particularly of the patio, which is now also made of permeable pavers, and again, the 2 proposed retaining walls. So the total impacts to the RPA associated with this new proposal equate to 509 square feet of impacts to the landward 50-foot RPA and 71 square feet of impacts to the seaward 50-foot RPA. So again, previous site plan was a total 838 square feet of impacts. The new proposal is 509 square feet of impacts. In addition, the applicants have incorporated permeable pavers into the current design of the patio. Required mitigation for this amount of impervious impacts equals the planting of 2 planting units or 2 canopy trees, 4 understory trees, and 6 shrubs. The applicants have already submitted a mitigation plan equating to 4 canopy trees, 8 understory trees, and 18 shrubs, therefore exceeding county mitigation requirements. This mitigation plan is shown on screen. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the construction of a pool, patio, and 2 retaining walls. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the construction of a pool and patio is considered accessory in nature. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicants any special privileges. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, and reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Up here are some site photography. Flagged is the border of the proposed pool in orange, and the proposed pool is flagged blue with the patio flagged in orange. Looking from the back of the backyard up towards the house, and from the other side of the yard. Got a little ahead of myself. Here are the those conditions I read for you earlier. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined the impacts associated with the proposal to be moderate for the proposed development. Staff recommends approval for this exception request, and if the board wishes to approve this request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for this project, including a building permit, erosion and sediment control plan, and a land disturbing permit if necessary. The planting of 4 canopy trees, 8 understory trees, and 18 shrubs. A surety of $2,000 be submitted in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee the mitigation plantings. This exception request approval shall become null and void if construction is not begun by May 11th, 2023, with written requests for an extension to the exception submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than March 30th, 2023, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at this time.
Looks a lot better.
When you mentioned stormwater, is that really just the permeable pavers?
Yes, sir.
I'm going back in memory now for encroachment within the seaward 50 feet for structures like this. And some accessory structures I believe have retaining walls and so forth to help control sheet flow and runoff. Not sure if we have a record of patio pool combinations. Any thoughts on that?
I do not know of any. I'm not sure if Mr. Wilson or Mr. Long could answer to that.
Mr. Rodley, I'm aware of one in the retreat that was approved on a sloping lot similar to this. It was a pool patio combination.
Very good. Thank you.
The representative is here.
Yes, one of the contractors is here tonight.
Okay, thank you. I believe the public hearing is still open, right? I didn't close the public hearing. So would anyone like to come?
That is correct.
Would anyone like to come forward and address the board?
Adam Burris, Home and Turf Landscaping, here for Robbie Shackelford.
My question was,
Yes.
with the elevation down and you're gonna dig the pool, are you gonna use a lot of the pool material that comes out of that to build that backside up so it's level, or are you going down the upper side?
We are going down on the upper side. We have an engineered wall at about 3.5 to 4 feet
Steps come.
That's where, well, the steps on one side, yes, and there'll be a wall that drops straight into the pool. And we're going to excavate all of that, and any backfilling that may need to be done will all be done by stone and compacted every two
That
inches.
would eliminate any fill on the backside of it. for
All
erosion.
soil would be hauled off to a landfill.
Sounds good. Any other questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you. Would anyone else like to speak on this issue? I'll close the public hearing at this time. Plan looks a lot better than last month. I think I can support this plan. Any other discussion? Would someone like to make a motion?
Make a motion, adopt a resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay case CBPA 22-0021-8072 Fairmont Drive.
We have a roll call?
Motion is to adopt. Mr. Roadley,
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip, Mr. Lukens,
Yes.
Mr. Dunn,
Yes.
Mr. Gusman.
Yes, motion carries. Thank you for coming out. Good luck with the project. That concludes our public hearings for tonight. Are there any matters for board consideration?
Yes, sir. Ms. Parman's going to make an announcement.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'd like to introduce you to Josh Everard. He is our new Assistant County Attorney. He comes to us by way of Hampton City Attorney's Office, and we are really, really glad to have him, so.
Welcome.
Welcome. Welcome. I hope we don't have to interact with you too much. Are there any matters of special privilege tonight? No matters of special privilege. Can we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
We are adjourned.